If you go back and look at some of the good presidents, our country was the wealthiest, proportionately the wealthiest. From 1870 to 1913, it was an all-tariff country. We didn't have income tax. That came in in 1913. We had tariffs. And we had so much money we didn't know what to do with it. We had, we had a couple of presidents that were very, very strong. McKinley, I guess more than anybody, but he was the tariff king, but he was very, very strong. It's sort of sad. He made a fortune for this country, became very rich, and then Teddy Roosevelt went out and vice president, and he spent the money. And they said Roosevelt was a great president. And let's say he was a great president, but the money was paid by McKinley with tariffs. Tariffs are charged by other countries at levels that are ridiculous. And I call those other countries to say, and every one of them is willing to give us everything now, by the way, just so you know. Sir, we'll charge you no tariffs, nothing. We'll give you everything. We'll give you access to our markets. We'll give you everything. Is that a correct statement, Scott?
This was Donald Trump talking high about the 25th American president, William McKinley, who was in office 1897 to 1901. Did you hear how Trump describes him as a tariff king? The same phrase he reserves for India these days. McKinley represented an era in American economic history when tariffs were a widely used tool or weapon for both protecting nascent American industry and promoting domestic manufacturing. This era lasted for about 70 years, from the end of the Civil War in 1860 to the Great Depression in 1930. This was a period when they were the chief source of, or tariffs were the chief source of revenue for the federal government. Again, something which makes Trump nostalgic. The tariff walls ring-fenced American economy against the mighty manufacturing muscle, not of China, but of the United Kingdom and other industrialized European parts at that time. The first Treasury Secretary, Alexander Hamilton, was as vocal as Trump these days about tariffs as a tool and a hawk on discouraging imports from the United Kingdom. The post-Civil War surge in industrial growth of America had much to do with tariffs providing guardrails to American steel industry, for example, against cheaper European steel. The steel industry fed into the railroad expansion, again heavily supported by tariffs. The two, steel and railroads, formed the foundation of the first wave of American industrialization that changed both the physical and economic geography of the United States. McKinley, even before he became president, brought what is called the McKinley Tariff Act of 1890, raising tariffs to the highest levels in American history at that time, levels which are being talked about by Trump now. Like the average tariff on imports reached a peak of 50%. Just for perspective, before Trump arrived on the scene in his first term, average American tariff was 3%. There was a window in the McKinley Act to negotiate reciprocal tariffs with trading partners, but only if there was a hard bargain. So what seems like novel in the manner of Trump is a copybook McKinley from the 1890 Act. Also, through much of this period of 70 years, the US Congress was in control of the Republicans, and tariffs were a central feature of their economic policy. That DNA has continued with some atavism and is reflecting in Trump rather strongly. The tariffs kept increasing post the First World War as the US calibrated its production and supplies in response to recovery of the European nations. Then came the 1930 Tariff Act, also called Smoot-Hawley Act, by which the Hoover administration jacked up the rates even further, making the tax more broad-based. Trade partners of the United States, Canada, France, UK, and others retaliated, bringing down overall global trade volume. For example, the US imports from Europe declined from US $1.3 billion in 1929 to just $390 million in 1932, while US exports to Europe fell from US $2.3 billion to $784 million in the same period. Overall, world trade declined by some 66%. Coming as it did at the cusp of the Great Depression, the tariff war added to the economic woes and fueled the depression even deeper. The 1930 Act was aimed at specifically protecting American agriculture in crisis. But the remedy proved worse than the disease. With corporations passing off the tariff burden to consumers, higher prices of food, clothing, and household items strained budgets of already struggling American middle-class families. It was an era of tumult. War clouds were gathering. Economic uncertainty was peaking. Tariffs were not helping. And then the World War II happened. As America came out victor and hence more confident on the other side of the war, with its allies, it set out to refashion world economy. Lessons from the 1930 Act and the Depression shifted accent on increased trade through tariff reductions. The loss of revenue on account of lower rates was more than compensated by increasing global trade volumes. Free trade agreements became the norm, with America shepherding the setting up of institutions like the World Bank, the IMF, and of course, subsequently the World Trade Organization. It was transatlantic consensus at work, with Anglo-Saxon, Euro-American chemistry deciding what the rest of the world would do. This had much to do with American swagger as the new empire post-World War II. A post-war surplus economy made America carry allies from Japan to Germany, from Korea to Canada on its shoulders. And then, among the rising tide, raising all boats, rose one ship, China. A still confident Washington handheld Beijing through the 1970s and 1980s, facilitating its entry into the World Trade Organization, even as it transferred much of its own manufacturing base to Chinese cities, making China the shop floor of the world. The dragon bid its time, thieving on intellectual property, rummaging through global supply chains, strengthening its grip over end-to-end production cycle, and bared the fangs only recently. The gloves are off. The dragon is breathing fire down the American neck. The Second Empire has come undone.
While the United States and many other nations play by the rules, these countries use government-run industrial planning and state-owned enterprises to rig the system in their favor. They engage in relentless product dumping, forced technology transfer, and the theft of intellectual property. The United States lost over 3 million manufacturing jobs, nearly a quarter of all steel jobs, and 60,000 factories after China joined the WTO. And we have racked up $13 trillion in trade deficits over the last 2 decades. But those days are over.
This was Trump, all fire and brimstone, launching a fusillade against the Chinese at the 2018 UNGA in his first term. If you look at the timings of Trump's tariff war, you realize the psychology behind the moves. Like in the 18th century, so now, it's a less confident America creating moats as it negotiates its place with the rest of the world. In a Thucydides trap with China, it is American angst playing out. The United States government has gained with its coffers richer by $100 billion since January. The annual tariff haul could land at around $300 billion. But this is the money American companies and importers are paying to the government. How long before they recover this cost from the end consumer? That's when the pinch would begin. As per a study done at Yale, Trump's tariff tantrums could cost American families around $2,300 this year. The study goes on to paint a depressing picture for the American economy that might shrink by as much as $110 billion per annum going forward, with reduction in employment and increase in inflation. The American national television has been debating for some time now how expensive their shoes and T-shirts imported from Vietnam and Bangladesh are going to get with the tariffs imposed. It will not be over till it's over. It will run its full cycle. Just in case you thought it's about Trump, no, it's about America. All the tariffs imposed during Trump's first term were retained by the Biden administration. Tariffs have morphed back to being a strategic instrument for achieving economic and political ends. Trade liberalization is history. It is back to reciprocal trade agreements instead of a global commons approach. Each nation has to guard its core interests. In the case of India, there is tremendous pressure to concede on GM crops. Because if you look at it, having outsourced most of its goods economy to China, there's very little America can offer India. It comes down to two sectors, defense and agriculture. Both, by their very nature, directly affect national security and sovereignty. The United States is itself struggling with the side effects of GM crops on the health of its citizenry, from mass obesity to increasing rates of cancer. Many new age ailments could be connected with the biotechnological tinkering with crops. But since America has nothing else to give, it would want to force those onto its allies like India. The Modi government has held on to its own till now, and hopefully would continue to do so till the Trump's tariff tantrums settle. There's no short-term solution to this crisis.